Namaste Bharat, Namaste Sanyukt Rajya America, Namaste India and United States of America. A very warm good evening to one and all. Our distinguished guests, my colleagues, my dearest students, ladies and gentlemen, and if I'm missing out anyone, then to all my esteemed participants of this webinar. One of the most defining characteristic of Indian culture is hospitality or the welcoming nature. We in India have the highest regards of our guests and value hospitalities the most, be it on any occasion or platform. A common saying here is Atithi Devo Bhava, meaning guests are the form of the god. Having said that, on behalf of the University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, UPES Dehradun, India, and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to India to our distinguished guest, industry expert and speaker for the day, Mr. Duane Dickson. We would have loved to welcome you in person at our university, and it would have been a privilege for us to have you here. Nevertheless, it is still a matter of great pride and privilege for us to welcome you on this platform and listen to your key insight on the topic future prospects of chemical engineering in oil and gas sector today. But before that, let me quickly set the stage for you to take over, and let me share with our esteemed audience a famous Sanskrit quote. Nachor haryam naraja haryam na bhatrubhajyam nacha bharakari vayam krite vardhate evam nityam vidyadhanam sarvadhanam pradhanam. This translates to no one can steal it, no authority can snatch it, not divided in brothers, not heavy to carry. As you consume or spend, it increases. As you share, it expands. Education is the best wealth among all the wealth anyone can have. And we as a torchbearers and instruments of imparting and sharing our knowledge with students on a daily basis truly believes in the notion of education, which indeed is the best gift and that we have inherited and gained over the years from our parents, our teachers, our gurus, and of course not to forgive our life, which is perhaps the best teacher of all times. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Sudhir Kumar Chaturvedi, faculty in the Department of Aerospace Engineering, and along with me, Dr. Vijay Parthasarthy, Professor and Head Department of Chemical Engineering at University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, Dehradun. I would like to quote three sentences of the Sanskrit, Adhigachati Jnanati Gyata. It means learn, learn, and learn. And we at UPES follows the instructions of learning never stops. UPES envisions itself as an institution of global standing which fosters development of professionally competent talent and contributes to the nation building. With such a vision in our mind, we had taken another leap in this journey where we had started a webinar series that gives us a chance to interact with and hear from the industries some of the most prominent personality of all time. As a matter of fact and pride, UPES has conducted several webinars on the various themes and topics in the last couple of months, with the active participations of more than 1,000 or 2,000 in any of the particular webinars. To add another feather to this hat, we have come up with another interesting session of webinar today on the topic future prospects of chemical engineering in oil and gas sectors. We at UPES Dehradun in India are delighted to honor you, the host today's webinar in the auspicious presence of Vice Chairman, US Oil and Gas and Chemical Sector Leader and Global Energy Resources Industrialist Consulting Leader, Deloitte Consulting LLP, Mr. Duane Dickson. Welcome, sir, to India. Duane Dickson is a Vice Chairman and Principal in Deloitte Consulting LLP's Energy Resources and Industrialist Industry Group, as well as the United States Oil and Gas and Chemical Sector Leader and Global Energy Resources and Industrialist Consulting Leader. Additionally, he is the former America Process Industrialist Leader and the former Global Chemical and Specialty Materials Leader for the Deloitte Global. Duane served as the World Economic Forum Project Advisor and the forum's Chemical Community Lead, Chemistry and Advanced Materials. He focuses on various services in the corporate and corporate growth strategy acquisitions and carve-outs and general management, work primarily with the chemicals, materials, industrial products, consumer packaged goods, medical devices, and safety equipment industries. Duane has more than 38 years of consulting experience in senior leadership positions in major industrial and healthcare product companies. Duane also has extensive experience serving as a senior executive focusing on operations and transactions. He has led a major transformational programs in the 4 major chemical companies, or yielding more than 200 million US dollar in profitability and more than $1 billion US dollar of the shareholder value. As a former vice president of more than $1 billion US dollar divisional of the division, drove significant profitability improvement and co-developed synergy capture plan and asset plans in support of the large merger. Also, as a former vice president of corporate venture M&A, Duane developed significant experience in transaction support, negotiation, joint venture management, diversity, and corporate development. He has also led corporate strategy and global marketing for the global manufacturer of medical products. Duane is well known and respected in oil and gas chemical sectors and has been invited to present his insights on advanced material systems, futures of chemicals, futures of mobility, and corporate strategies at major global chemicals events, including those sponsored by the Forum, American Chemistry Council, Chemical Marketing and Economic Group, and Socio di Chemie Industriali. He has been published in the Wall Street Journal for a leading edge point of view on the chemical industry, cyclicity, receiving coverage on the front page. Duane holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Southern Methodist University. He also completed the advanced management program at London Business School. Welcome to the Digital India at UPES, sir. Before I hand over to you, I would request Dr. Parthasarthy, Professor and Head, Department of Chemical Engineering, to give the overview of the Department of Chemical Engineering. Thank you, sir. Welcome to India as well as the UPES. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Now over to Dr. Parthasarthy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sudhir, and welcome, Duane, for this webinar. And good evening, everyone. Department of Chemical Engineering is offering 2 undergraduate programs and 2 postgraduate programs. So in undergraduate programs, we have BTech in Chemical Engineering, specialization in refining and petrochemicals, which has been accredited by NBA in November 2019. And we have another BTech program, BTech in Applied Petroleum Engineering, specialization in gas stream. And in postgraduate program, we have MTech Chemical Engineering, specialization in process design. And the second postgraduate program is MTech in Pipeline Engineering. We have approximately around 800 plus students in our department in all these programs with 31 faculty members. And 60% of our faculty members are having PhD, notably from UMass, Pennsylvania, Missouri Institute of Science and Technology, Rolla, Salford from UK, NUS Singapore, University of Teesside, and it goes on. And most of the faculty members are from reputed institutes like IITs in India. And 1/3 of our faculty members are having both academic as well as the industrial experience. Our average industrial and the academic experience of the department is around 15 years. So with this, it's my pleasure to welcome Duane for this webinar. And over to you, Duane.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. It always strikes me that the longer the introduction, the older the person. It takes a long time to read what people have done in their lives. Maybe we could pull the slide deck up at this point, and we can go through a few ideas, and then I hope to have a fair bit of time towards the end for some discussion, questions, and answers, if that makes sense. So maybe we can move to the next slide. And let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that we're going to cover today. So first thing, I'll be the first to admit, when we're not traveling around and we're not seeing, other parts of the world and so forth, we see COVID-19 a little bit through our own eyes and what's happening around us. So I will be very interested to hear any stories from you on how the pandemic is impacting life in India. I will probably be able to talk a little bit about the American perspective and what I've been able to research throughout the world, and what my clients are saying. We'll discuss some trends in the chemical industry, and we'll look at some scenarios for how things will unfold based on all the uncertainty and all the disruption that we're dealing with. And then we'll do a very, very quick walk through oil and gas impact analysis. And we know that oil and gas, not only as an industry, is a very important industry, but we also know that it is the method of production for the feedstock for the chemical industry. So we watch it pretty closely no matter what. And if I do this in the time I should, we'll spend about 30 to 35 minutes on this material, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussions. So maybe move to the next slide. Let's start with what do you do when 20% of the demand evaporates overnight, when economies shut down and things get difficult? And I like the whole concept of how important learning is and education being the best wealth, because really it's an opportunity to learn what's going on, what's changing, what might be morphing into one thing or another. So one of the things that we did is we did a pretty extensive survey with executives globally in the chemical industry to see what the key concerns were. And some are the same as they always are, and some are a little bit different, and I'll highlight those. But we talked to over 30 executives in more than 15 companies. We did this pretty quick. We have a segmentation in Deloitte that's called, so a long time ago, we used to refer to the industry as commodities and specialties. Then we heard commodities and intermediates and specialties. But in the last few years, we've taken to classifying the segmentation of the industry as natural owners, which are those who are very close to the feedstock, and the vertical integration steps that they go downstream into chemicals are very advantaged each step that they go. So they're a group with a lot of resources, a lot of assets, and a lot of power. Differentiated commodities are product lines that have a reasonably finite market, and in some cases they're highly differentiated and hard to get and very intellectually property driven. In other cases they're a bit more commoditized, but they're limited by the lack of sort of unlimited demand. Solution providers, relatively new space. You heard in the introduction that I spent a lot of time in advanced material systems. I've also helped start a few material science companies, and there's a real interesting and exciting world of being able to apply properties to existing materials and shorten development cycles and provide solutions that are very much needed in a changing, growing world. So that's a little bit about the study and how we thought about it. The findings from a social perspective, we went virtual. Maybe stay on this page a little longer, Mike, thanks. We went virtual pretty much overnight. I think we were worried about where the workforce is going to come from longer term, and we're worried about, exactly what will be the mobility picture. Obviously, people needed to keep coming into the chemical plants and make sure that the operations were safe and make sure that maintenance was happening and so forth. But a large percentage of the industry operated virtual and got through a couple of key quarters, closing the books, and probably the biggest impact that required interpersonal connection in the labs is still yet to be evaluated in terms of how it works. Certainly, researchers can work together virtually, but there are certain aspects of experimentation and proximity that have to be worked out. We've seen digital start to take hold in the chemical industry over the past 5 years or so, but we've seen evidence that this is going to accelerate pretty quickly just based on a lot of the things we've had to do to get through the pandemic. but also by necessity because of the economic impact of all of this, looking for ways to be more efficient, automation on the rise, and other tools for better analytics on the rise. We've seen supply chains move from what we used to hope were resilient supply chains that could withstand hurricanes and withstand difficult, changes in trade relations and so forth. But now we've seen that it's just not enough in a pandemic like this. It's very important to have supply chain transparency, and in fact, a broader ecosystem transparency, so that you can locate things that are needed and get them to the places that they're needed. So that's become very interesting, and there again is a digital opportunity, and that's creating way more transparency of supply chains. We have to realize that this pandemic is one part of the issue, and it created a large demand reduction. We also have an oil price that's been misbehaving for quite a while. Some of the players in the industry, from the supply side, we're focused on taking the price down. That would be Russia and Saudi Arabia. And then the industry's reaction to the reduction in demand from COVID is significant reductions in capital expenditures, despite a rebound in consumption in some parts of the market. So we have to look at oil price and how it might affect natural gas, which is a big part of the petrochemical industry in the US. And we have to look at the rebound in consumption across the board. So we may be seeing a fairly significant rebound in certain parts of the world in automobile utilization, but we've probably lost a lot of what we were seeing in the world of Uber and shared rides. We've probably lost for good a certain percentage of the volumes that we saw in aviation, commercial aviation. And it just remains to be seen what consumption patterns are going to look like in the future. The whole policy perspective, this is where I'd like to say, really nice things about the chemical industry. Prior to COVID, the chemical industry was under a lot of pressure about single-use plastics and its sustainability profile and track record. Its need for better chemical answers through recycling, and its need for a reduction in carbon footprint. During COVID, it was abundantly clear that many of the products that the chemical industry makes were essential to being able to get through the pandemic, whether those were sanitization fluids, hand sanitizers, or antibacterial soaps, or other cleaning agents, whether those were PPE, masks, gloves, gowns, face shields, etc., or whether those were packages that stop food from spoiling in a supply chain that wasn't getting supplies all over the place, or just essential products that we needed as we changed the way our life worked. Instead of going to the office for half the day and working, and living at home for half the day, we were spending our entire days in our homes and needed more supplies. But the chemical industry really did a good job of coming through during this period. I think if we look at the C-suite and what they're mostly concerned about, one is what the workforce is going to be like and what the ways of working are going to be. A second one is digital is accelerating and I don't understand it as well as I used to. What are the real frontiers I need to be thinking about? The feedstock picture is definitely concerning. And I would say from a policy perspective, how long will the pandemic go on is on everybody's mind, but a big issue is going to be how is global trade going to work? And specifically, there's a lot of export capacity built in a number of different countries. is there going to be a need for exports based on a low oil price worldwide and low LNG prices globally? So that's the executive oversight. Let's go to the next and just sort of look at some facts and statistics. So first thing is we've got purchasing managers index, and anytime it goes below 50, we get worried. It was below 50 before COVID, but it's been down as low as 27 in April, and it's back up to 36. It's a small victory, but we do see signs of not only continuing turbulence, but a little bit better sentiment from the purchasing managers going forward. The forecasted decline in global GDP at 3%, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. I have a feeling it could be a little bit larger than a 3% decline, but it's gonna be a dramatic decline, and it's gonna put the world in a recession. In the U.S., jobless claims, that we just had a jobless claims report last Thursday, and we continue to see successive weeks of additional claims and very, very high unemployment in the U.S. and worldwide. We know that, and consumers aren't spending. Retail spending is down. On the perspective of the virus, and we track the virus at Deloitte, and our clients track the virus pretty closely. We look a lot at new cases per week. We look at hospital beds utilized. We look at people who go into the intensive care unit, whether or not people are coming out of the hospital faster or better. We also are monitoring traffic patterns, cars on the road, people going through airports. As you can see here, we see that 353,000 people were passing through the airport on May 31st. And the low in April was around 88,000. The normal in the U.S. going through airports was about 2.1 million per day. So you can kind of get an order of magnitude there that air travel is really down, and it hasn't all the way come back. And the EU has really done a good job of moving this ahead, and they're on schedule with their reopening plans. They did just announce a very, very large stimulus initiative yesterday and today, so they're impacted as well. But fortunately, they've had a good set of steps. They were a continent that sort of suffered through the virus very early, but they took care of it, and it's starting to show signs that all their efforts are starting to be worth it, and schools are about to begin again. I know from just talking to colleagues in India, a lot of the data is similar, a lot of the issues are similar. It's still too early to tell most throughout the world, but what we're really hoping for is some therapeutics and vaccines that can stem the tide and hopefully fight off a really large second wave, which is something that obviously concerns all the executives we talk to. So let's sort of move along, and that's pretty much the COVID story. And let's just take a look at what has happened. So this particular industry, when we start to look at stock prices, we start to look at volumes, we start to look at new investment in capital. Both the chemical industry and the oil and gas industry have kind of taken a hit. The one thing that nobody's backed off on are fairly major carbon footprint and environmental commitments that they made before COVID. But what we have seen is we've seen a drop in share prices, and in some cases a opportunity for companies like Shell and BP to reposition themselves, Total, and some companies eliminating their dividends, some companies really working hard to uphold their dividend. But the chemical industry compared to the oil and gas industry, the chemical industry came through this okay. They got hurt in areas like automobile materials and construction related materials, but they did have a ability to rearrange some assets and do a lot of supply for PPE, for medical equipment, for food packaging, for cleaning supplies. So that's kind of state of the industry. And we move to the next slide. Let's just start looking at what's happened to some of the trends. So before we went into COVID, the environment was a concern, and single-use products and sustainable products was a concern. There's a thing called the energy transition, which was going on, which was long-term going to reduce demand for fuels. There was a lot of capacity going in, especially in the Gulf Coast of the US and in the Middle East, some in China, for mainly petrochemicals, but there was capacity pretty much all up and down the chemical chain. And we were seeing what you might call digital experiments, digital pilots, to see what the potential for digital was, but we weren't seeing widespread adoption of digital prior to COVID. Now, as we move forward, next slide, we're starting to see some differences. So obviously, focus on health and safety. There's not only digital solutions there, but there's just different ways of working and procedures. There's some people that are working at home. There's different ways of working when you're on site at a plant or in a lab. The preference for remote channels, for the ability to basically be able to virtually call up information and learnings and groups of people is definitely on the rise. Being able to utilize resources all over the world is really important. Pop-up ecosystems, this is really an interesting concept. It's groups of companies that band together to solve problems that hadn't been there before. Sustainability, as I said, continues to be strong, maybe increasing investments. The one area of R&D that's getting a lot of intense focus is cleaning materials, biocidal materials, and things that could help in fighting off COVID, whether those are fluids or surface science for whether they're hard surfaces or surfaces that are protecting somebody in their hands or their face. The virtualization of the workforce, really nobody thought it could be as virtual as it is, and it seems to be working out for now. The question is, how long will it last? And when we get to the higher stakes, higher risk things like a big chemical contract between a supplier and a customer, or new technology, or mergers and acquisitions, are we going to be able to continue to do this virtual, and is it going to be important to get people together in person? And of course, we talked about accelerated digitization. We see, obviously, in the transparency of supply chains, a need for digital sensors and artificial intelligence and machine learning. We see that also in the development pipeline for new materials. So those are pretty interesting and exciting trends. If we look at the next slide, this kind of looks at what's decelerating. We might see a little less global movement of people. We might see a slowdown in urbanization. We might see a slowdown in the sharing economy. The stock price of the Ubers of the world certainly suggests that. The gig economy probably is not as sure that we would call that a setback as we would call that potentially changing shape, changing the way it's going to look. And then the global supply chain, are we going to see companies take things more regionally or country focused, just ensure self-sufficiency in the countries and regions where they participate, and not count on a just-in-time supply chain all over the world, maybe think more just in case that rather than just in time. So This is kind of the trends picture for the chemical industry, and I'll move quickly to the next section. But when we start to think about the amount of uncertainty that I just talked about, whether it's some of the data and statistics that impact the production of chemicals, or whether it's the trends that impact the organization or the ability to work together or the ability to invent together or produce together. When we look at uncertainty, we decided that looking at some scenarios would be very important. So we like to anchor scenarios with, where the most uncertainty lies. And so the two places that we felt the uncertainty was anchored were, number one, the severity of the pandemic. How long is it going to last? What shape is it going to be like? Are there going to be second waves? How harsh is it going to be on the world, and especially if it lasts a long period of time? And then the second is behavioral changes that are going on in consumers, which are finding their way into chemicals. And I will just say, what was in the chemical industry as an executive, consumer behavior wasn't really that relevant. It mattered, but it wasn't something you tracked. It wasn't something you paid a tremendous amount of attention to. You believed you were listening to your customers and they were listening to the consumers at that point in time. That's really not the way it is now. Consumers have to be listened to. The way consumers' buying patterns are working, the way they care about health and safety, the way they care about the planet and the environment is immutable. It's absolutely critical to pay attention to the consumer. And it's important to pay attention to what's changing in the workforce for two reasons. Consumers of today are your workers of tomorrow. So, happy, engaged consumers who understand your industry and understand the benefits of your company are it's pretty critical to have that. And then as the workforce changes and different behaviors and different capabilities are expected, there's a lot of uncertainty as to where that's going to come from as well. So that kind of anchors our scenarios. If we go to the next slide, we end up with 4 scenarios. Times are changing, which is, this pandemic combined with where we are, combined with digital, combined with the oil shock, has changed things forever. We're never going to go back to things the way they were. The good old days would be a rebound versus a reset. The darkest hours would have the pandemic really continuing for a long period of time, and us as a society not being able to get our arms around it. And then let them eat cake, which is the opportunity for us to benefit from the many things that we did to get through the pandemic, but for the pandemic to be very short and not as significant in terms of second wave and getting things onto a more normal footing quicker. So benefiting from all the new innovations and also benefiting from a relatively short period for the virus. So as we move ahead to the next slide, this just gives us a little bit more of what I just said, and a couple of things I want to highlight here. So in the good old days, it's a different normal, but it's going to feel a little bit more like it used to feel. There are lessons learned, there are existing practices that changed, but orders come the same way. The customers and suppliers are relatively similar to one another as they were in the past. Systems get a little bit better, but it's roughly the same again. And for the most part, a lot of the key indicators we watch, like automobiles produced and housing starts and consumer sentiments and purchasing manager indexes, they start to rebound and look more like they did prior to the pandemic. In the times are changing, it's all new. There's sort of no more business as usual mentality, and you know, you not only find that medicine and science combine with maybe a weaker virus, get through the virus, but also a lot of really good innovation takes place at that point in time. When we start to think about the other impacts of this, I'm not going to go deep into it, but the economic impact of this is something to watch at the same time as, you know, the getting back to normal part of this. And that's the let them eat cake area, where it is a little bit difficult to figure out how consumers are doing, whether or not there's an evenness in terms of economic capabilities all over the world, whether or not the stronger got stronger and the less advantaged struggled more. Those are all things that we have to worry about. So here we've got the 4 scenarios. Normally when we do a webinar with our clients, we usually ask them which scenario is the most likely. It's almost always times are changing and let them eat cake. I don't think anybody expects the good old days, and nobody really wants to see the darkest hour. Let's go to the next slide. So that was chemicals. This is going to be really, really quick because it's just a little bit on oil and gas. And what I'd like you to do is think about oil and gas more as a feedstock here and less as an industry, but there will be discussions about the industry. So the oil price environment, what goes on with shale and shale investment, especially in the US, and then what the impact that would have on things like natural gas are the things that we're focused on. We can go to the next slide. So at the start of the Great Compression, we had things changing in the energy industry in a fairly big way. So the first thing is we were seeing telecommuting as a normal, and now it's going to increase even further. There's a difference in fuel order, and you know, the Great Compression has kind of created a flattening of it all. So a naphtha cracker in China and a natural gas cracker in the Gulf Coast are now pretty competitive with one another. So there's not really any regional advantages to speak of anymore. There are certain parts of the energy transition that are going to accelerate. So an example would be, it is way less expensive and way simpler to build an electric vehicle platform than a combustion engine platform. And auto companies are going to be looking for ways to reduce costs and so forth and still meet the market needs. So a very simple practical thing like that could start changing powertrains and could change energy demand over time. Changes in trade and value chains. So we think about all the export capacity for LNG, or how much LNG has been able to be produced in Australia and places like that. And what we see is that the value chains that we had that were in place before and the way we're looking at advantage has changed an awful lot. The biggest concern, just to put it all in a nutshell, is what happens if oil stays really low, and let's say $20 a barrel, and it drives shale production to near zero. Tons of CapEx reductions already taken place. There's already been a number of wells that are shut in. If the associated natural gas that goes with that stops, do we see a spike in natural gas? And then do we see a disadvantage in the Gulf Coast for the natural gas crackers in the US, and a greater advantage for crackers all over the world, India, China, the Middle East, even Europe? So that's what we think about when we think about the Great Compression. Maybe we can go to the next slide. And then I think we look a little bit at the economic storm on the horizon, and I'm going to cut to the chase here because I know we're a little bit short on time. About 35% or 30% of the shale operators in the US are technically insolvent. So we were expecting as much as $300 billion announced in asset impairments by the end of the second quarter, and we're getting kind of close to that. It's closer to $150 billion now, but the price of oil is also at 40, and when we were doing this modeling, it was in the lower 30s. So we definitely see that capacities are going to change. The industry is going to consolidate on the upstream side in oil and gas as well. And so it's going to be an interesting period of time for that industry. And we see companies like Shell and Total and BP repositioning themselves as energy companies and reducing their dividends or taking away the dividends altogether and position themselves as growth stocks and renewable companies. And we see companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil and Reliance and others focusing more on our job is to produce energy for a certain market and really focusing on being, really good suppliers to the markets that they feel very strongly that are theirs. So that pretty much sums up, the Great Compression and the work we just did on that. Maybe Mike, you can move to the next slide. And all this really says is we can plot out all the different companies and how they're going to do. Right now is not a time for too much mergers and acquisition activity. There was one announced by Chevron yesterday of Noble Energy, but we do expect over time, as the dust settles a little bit on COVID and so forth, we'll start to see signs of consolidation. And there's a chart just like this for the chemical industry, where we'll start to see some chemical industry companies start to get together through mergers and acquisitions, and we'll also start to see some companies change their portfolios and divest parts of their portfolios. I think this kind of wraps up my prepared remarks. This gives us a little over 15 minutes for question and answer. So maybe that's where we can go next. And what's the most effective way to do question and answer in your experience with this group, doctors? I can just look on the Q&A feature here, see what we've got. So there's one question: is maximum salary in chemical engineering in the USA? What I can say about that one is I don't think that's changed very much. I think there might be fewer jobs in chemical engineering in the USA, more automation, a little bit of consolidation. But before the pandemic, chemical engineering was very, very much in demand, and I don't expect that to change. I expect that it will still be there. So, maximum salary for starting out got into the 80s, 80,000 per year, as I recall, and I don't see that really changing that much. What should a student try to make a future in the oil industries? I think the question what's probably behind the question is, so oil industry is going through a little bit of a long-term change and a little bit of a short-term change. The COVID and so forth is a short-term change that's forced companies to reposition themselves and restructure and so forth. The longer-term change is these companies have to face what they're going to be longer term. So I think a future in the oil industry isn't just about hydrocarbons. A future in the oil industry is about energy and efficient ways of supplying energy to markets. And I think it's going to be also very, very heavily weighted towards environmental concerns, carbon footprint, and sustainability. Overall development, what is the overall development came across the chemicals and its global trade? So I think as an overall mantra, an overall way to think about chemicals, in the last 10 years, since 2009, when we started doing deep research on the chemical industry, it was $3 trillion of commerce. It's now 4.1 trillion of commerce. It is an industry that grows when the population grows, that grows when the middle class gets bigger in various countries, that grows when urbanization becomes important, and that grows when we have food shortages, because technologies come from the chemical industry for all of these things. So it means that it has to be a global industry because these are global problems. It means that when things are better in global trade, the chemical industry has much less friction and things work a lot better. And longer term, I would expect policymakers to try to make that happen, because overall the benefits of the chemical industry, the way that it improves quality of life, the way that it helps solve problems like health and pandemic and starvation problems is pretty major. So I would say the global trade picture will continue to evolve and continue to be more trade friendly over time. I think we have current politicians in China and the U.S. that are trying to figure out how much power they have or what they can do to sort of change trade flows, and it's obviously very disruptive. But over time, I think the chemical industry is very focused on very open, free, transparent trade. Future advances in desulfurization processes. Well, this has been going on for quite a while, and I assume mainly focused question on coal degasification and so forth, but there's been many advances in improving the cleanliness of coal. There's been many advances in improving the cleanliness of all aspects of hydrocarbon production. But over time, until we get to more circular and sustainable models, we're really going to find that it's the end of life of the product issues in the chemical space that are the problems. So, what is the best thing to do with the PET bottle when it hits its end of life? What is the most important thing to do with other plastics that have reached their end of life, whether that's the first time through or not? And that really leads us to a frontier that's being pushed by the chemical industry, led by Bob Patel from LyondellBasell, to look for methods of chemical recycling, the ability to break down chemicals as if they were pieces of Lego, and then put them back together as other compounds or the same compounds. Or if the best potential end-of-life solution for a given product is to burn it as very clean energy, then burn it as very clean energy. But the whole idea is it needs to be looked at as a total system, and sustainability is the big part of it. I have no doubt desulfurization processes will continue to be important over time. I'm just trying to see if there are other questions here. Am I doing this the right way, guys? I hope so.
Yeah, I think it's going well, Duane.
Yeah.
It's good.
So, June?
I got one. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, there is one question that is regarding in your slide. It might take more time to start the economic activities in a big way. So where I see the economic growth will be back after Diwali in India or in Europe after Christmas. So what is the viewpoint from your side? And this is the next question is what is the break even for the shale industry?
Yep, those are two real good questions. Very different questions. So I think the first one, economic activity getting started in a big way. You know, I don't know what you call it. If we look back in history at the Spanish flu and we look at the Roaring 20s that kind of came out of that period of time, or we look at all the pent up demand. What we don't have in this economic situation is a part of the industry like banking or housing or something that has crashed. What we have is just a lack of demand because people stopped moving around because of concern of health. And assuming we find some sort of very, what would we call efficacious answer to this, something, vaccines or therapeutics or both, that give people the confidence to move around again, I think we see a very, very big economic recovery. Whether that'll occur by Christmas or, 2 Christmases from now, that's a hard one to gauge. But looking at the US stock market and the investment in the companies making the vaccines and therapeutics, one would guess that whoever asked this question is closer to the truth. It's probably something that everybody's counting on for the late fall. The break even for the shale industry, that's a really good question. I would say somewhere in the $55 range is where I think it is on average. I think there are obviously some shale operations that can break even at a lower price, some that are pretty inefficient that break even at a higher price. But I think we need to see an oil price in the 50s at least for the, at this particular point in time, for that industry to be breaking even and investing. So until we, at $40, we may not see as much shut-in as we would at $25 or $30, but we're not going to see investment.
Okay. So one more interesting question, that is what sectors or techniques in chemical engineering are very new and it is budding stage?
I'm glad someone asked this question. This is a really, so if it doesn't show, I am highly passionate about our industry. And I think it's because we do so much good in the world when we apply ourselves to very important societal problems, whether those are things that we do to provide energy or water or health solutions or other quality of life solutions. We all read that 97% of the physical things that we touch in any given day has some chemical content in it. It's a very, very important industry. But I think the areas of chemical engineering that are going to be important are number one, applying processing technologies to materials. So that has 2 big components. Having the ability from probably a digital perspective to understand an immense number of material combinations and try to isolate the materials that are most likely to be the best for the need you're trying to meet, the solution you're trying to build. And then the second part is to get really creative in engineering processing technologies like nanotechnology, surface science, to create the right additive profile so that the compound you're developing can operate really effectively and really inexpensively in a new system like an energy system or a water system. And that's just a really, really exciting part of our industry. And I mentioned I'd started up a few companies. I also think the frontiers of 3D printing and the relatively few number of compounds that are qualified in 3D printing right now, and when more polymers and elastomers are available to 3D printing. I think the frontiers of 3D printing and what we can build there are going to be pretty amazing too.
Thank you. You
Yeah,
have given a very nice presentation. Just maybe in 1 minute, can you say what will be the broader scope or the future scope of a chemical engineer globally? Maybe just in 1 or 2 minutes, if you can explain completely.
Yep. So the scope of a chemical engineer globally, 30 years ago when I was in the industry, you started in a plant, you learned in the plant, you did some maintenance, you got involved in some processing engineering, you might have spent a little time in R&D, you might have gone out in the field and helped solve some customer problems. So that was kind of the scope of an engineer then. Scope of an engineer now is to take a look at an entire supply chain as a network, to be able to look at systems level design and try to solve problems at a systems level. And that means not just the chemistry, but the physics and the other aspects of it. It involves probably knowing a fair bit about programming and data science. And I think the most important thing, and this is an observation over time, is almost every CEO of a chemical company in the world that I've ever met, and certainly the best ones, are all chemical engineers. So, there's a lot of potential for somebody who really starts out as a chemical engineer and understands how things work to take on more and more responsibility and to understand how to apply investment and risk to chemistry.
Thank you, sir. You have given a very good presentation today. And
Well,
since
thank
we
you.
are running short of time, we have a lot of questions in the chat box, but we cannot questions all the things. So just I will Vijay Studies, Dehradun, and the entire support of the students, our esteemed attendees in the webinar would like to take this opportunity to place on record our heartily thanks to Mr. Duane Dickson for the gracious presence and taking out the valuable time of his busy schedule to enlighten us today. It's always been our pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking forward to see you again in the upcoming events also. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you all the participants who have joined today. Thank you so much, sir. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you. My pleasure. And next time in person, I hope.
Sure, sure.
sure. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you.